Welcome all to this webinar. In the short time that Commodore Uday Bhaskar has been able to reach out to all the panelists and to have just not made it as a Zoom webinar meeting, but also to take it across to Facebook as a live stream. Uh, this day we celebrate 1 month of the Ukraine invasion conflict, or as President Putin puts it, a special military operation. Technically, for those people who want to argue that it is 28 days, since February is a month of 28 days, but figuratively, we're looking at the war started on the 24th of February and we're on the 24th of March. And we all are today to take stock of what it has in its wider implications, and then, of course, narrow those down to how it impacts us all all for all of us here in India. And for making it simpler for the audience, we have assembled a great team of speakers. We have the former Chief of Naval Staff, Admiral Arun Prakash. We have Admiral Raja Menon. We have Lieutenant General Kamal Dawar. We have Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma. We have Major General PK Mullick. Have Colonel Ravi Rajan. We have Group Captain TP Srivastava. We have Colonel Jasinder Singh, and and any one of those who later on would like to make an intervention, we will of course have them join us. Since we are tight on time and are tightly scheduled, I now hand you over to Commodore Uday Bhaskar to provide the opening context to this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwini. Greetings to everybody who has tuned in, both from India and the subcontinent, and those who have joined us from abroad. We were very gratified to see the responses that have come in from other parts of the world. So, which is why I'm deliberately saying greetings and welcome to this particular panel discussion. As my colleague, Colonel Ashwini, has just mentioned to you, allow me first of all to welcome all of you on behalf of South Asia Monitor and the Society for Policy Studies. Most of you may be aware of this platform, the South Asia Monitor. It's a web-based news platform. And we have had a lot of, I would say, meaningful contributions as far as the Ukraine war is concerned since it began on the 24th of February. So I also want to thank all our contributors who have joined today's discussion. Very briefly, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Feb 24th to where we are now, it can be triangulated, it can be analyzed, it can be monitored at many levels, with the caveat that, as in any war, there is a certain fog. And we are not quite sure about the narrative, about the facts. And like most wars, with every passing phase, whether it's a month or a year, I'm sure there'd be new inputs, just as we are discovering about World War I more than 100 years later. Against this backdrop, one could very broadly say that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has got a very broad geopolitical dimension to it, in which you can subsume determinants like current politics, past history, aspirations, narratives, the strategic culture of the principal interlocutors, who are not just Russia and Ukraine, but the extended European community across the Atlantic, the United States, and so on. So that is one broad plane. We also have the geoeconomic domain of this war. It's too recent to come to any definitive conclusions, but globalization, supply chains, energy, gas, hydrocarbons, all of that has been convulsed. And within this, we can see the role of technology at different levels. And that's one of the issues that will be addressed in our discussion. And we also have the equivalent of the humanitarian and the physical dimension of this war, whose implications are yet to be assessed. And this is cross-domain, meaning that if you talk about President Putin referring to the nuclear capability, it cuts across all domains: geopolitical, geoeconomic, humanitarian, demographic, and environmental at one level. And all of this has to be seen against the filter of what does it mean for India. We've had a flurry of visits. There's a lot of discussion about India's dependency on Russia. We are aware of Galwan 2020. So all of this is going to be differently, I would say, impacted. और मैं सबसे यही कहना चाहता हूं कि उसी दायरे में हम यूक्रेन का जो जंग है उसकी समीक्षा करेंगे। भारत के अंदर तरह तरह का विवाद चल रहा है कि भारत क्या सिद्धांतों के ऊपर निर्धारित होगा या केवल अपने राष्ट्रीय हित के ऊपर। लोकतांत्रिक देश में इस प्रकार का विवाद होना चाहिए, पर जहां तक आज का जो हमारा प्रयास है, हम इसको सैनिक दृष्टिकोण से काफी बारीकी तरीके से देखेंगे और उसके लिए हमने एक खास पैनल को स्वागत किया है। On that note, let me introduce and welcome Admiral Arun Prakash, our former Chief of Naval Staff, Chairman, Chiefs of Staff Committee. He has been writing extensively over the last few weeks about the Ukraine war in particular, about India's vulnerability in relation to Russia, Atmanirbharta, and a range of issues. And earlier, of course, he had written about India's own military preparedness and certain inadequacies and how they could perhaps be redressed. So that's the broad, as I said, background. I'll introduce each speaker as we go down the line. But for now, I'll request all our panelists to put their own phones on or microphones on mute and hand over the floor to Admiral Arun Prakash. I will also mute myself. And when Admiral Prakash concludes his opening remarks, I'll request the other panelists to come in one by one. Admiral Prakash, sir, all yours.
Thank you, Uday. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
All right. So let me start by putting this whole affair in a historical context, historical come philosophical. The upholding the sovereignty of states, the sanctity of national borders, prevention of war as an instrument of state policy has been a perpetual concern for mankind. And if you go right back to the Treaty of Westphalia, 1648, to the Congress, Vienna Congress of 1815, the formation of the League of Nations, and finally the United Nations, whose the preamble of whose charter starts with these words. It says, "We, the peoples of the UN, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow." So the endeavor has been to keep away from war or to prevent war as much as possible. Now, in the euphoria that followed the end of the Cold War, Francis Fukuyama, an American analyst, had predicted that this was not only the end point of mankind's ideological evolution, but it was also meant the universalization of Western liberal democracy as a final form of human government. Now, poor Fukuyama has had to eat his words because Western liberal democracy, far from becoming universal, has been steadily diminishing all over the world. And the Cold War is very much back with us, with the US and Europe now raged against a Russia-China axis. We have to see how this whole thing develops. Till very recently, we also believe, most of us believed, conventional wisdom said that spread of free trade across the world would guarantee world peace. The power of economics and globalization would not permit yet another war. We all, in our heart of hearts, wanted to believe this. So against this backdrop, there is no doubt that Vladimir Putin's ruthless and single-minded pursuit of hegemony has stunned the world and brought us almost to the brink of World War III. So let me go over a few aspects of this emerging situation. Let's start with the casus belli. What are the causes of this conflict? Now, they can be discussed endlessly by experts. I'm no expert, but I'll just put my finger on three essential elements. Firstly, Putin says that a Ukrainian nation does not exist because it's an inalienable part of Russia's history, culture, and spiritual space. This kind of argument we've heard often from hegemonic states who wish to impose their will on others. Our clearest example is China, the 9-dash line, and their disregard for the McMahon line in our case, etc. So this kind of mythology is often thrown up by hegemons. Secondly, Putin accuses the US and NATO of bad faith because prior to the fall of the USSR, Gorbachev had received reassurances that NATO would advance not an inch. These were the words of James Baker, Secretary of State, and his expansion would not impair Soviet security interests. These were solemn assurances given at the highest level by at the presidential level, George W. Bush, etc. But they were violated. By 2021, NATO had enlisted 14 former members of the Warsaw Pact and was seen edging towards Russia's borders. It's possible that Ukraine may also be seduced into NATO. So this particular aspect probably had some credibility. And lastly, Russia has always had a quest for warm water ports, because if you deprive it of the Black Sea, Sevastopol, Odessa, Mariupol, etc., then it is left with only ports in the northern seas. So this is another compelling factor which must have pushed Putin in the direction he has gone. But regardless of how much credibility or weightage you give to these grievances or provocations, as Putin calls them, there can be no justification whatsoever, whether moral, legal, or political, for the manner in which Russia has mounted a brutal aggression on a sovereign neighbor. There's just no justification. Now, that India's compulsions have prevented us from joining in universal condemnation of Russia, something that we can talk about. There are compelling circumstances, but something we need to think about. What about the ongoing conflict? This conflict is marked by contradictory reports. The media, I mean, it's difficult to believe one side or the other. There are exaggerated claims being made, etc. But at a very conservative level, all one can say is that Putin, while selecting an aim, which is one of the principles of war, selection and maintenance of aim, he seems to have fallen between two stools. Now, either he wanted regime change via sudden hard traumatic knock or a blow, or he wanted to defeat Ukraine militarily and occupy this vast country. So if it was one of these aims, he seems to have fallen between the two, because the special military operation that he says that he's mounted is not very clear where it's going, what are its aims, and whether they will achieve them or not. Now, in either case, whatever his aims, it's been a month into the conflict, and Putin seems to have failed quite badly. As far as regime change is concerned, Zelensky is well and alive. He's doing a very good PR job. He's seen on TV addressing parliaments all over the world and getting standing ovations. His government seems to be intact. His command and control seems to be all right. Russian forces, on the other hand, have opened 3 or 4 lines of advance and created extended lines of communication with logistic problems, stretched logistics. And they also laid siege to a number of cities, Mariupol, Kiev, Kharkiv, etc. They've made territorial gains, but they've been very limited, and their advance has been bogged down in various places, which is quite surprising for a military of the strength of Russia's. The Ukrainian forces, although outnumbered and outgunned weapon-wise, are putting up a strong defense. They operate in small mobile units, lie in ambush, and inflict attrition on casualties and attrition on Russian armor, infantry, and aircraft. But as I said, claims on both sides are exaggerated. One doesn't hear much from Russia, but the Ukrainian claims are probably exaggerated. The Ukrainians are also mounting counterattacks, which doesn't speak very well of the Russian advance. So far from a swift victory, Russia is faced with a long drawn-out war of attrition unless it agrees to a negotiated settlement. And even then, there could be sporadic insurgency in the Ukrainian countryside, guerrilla warfare, etc. So it's a difficult situation. Questions have been raised about Putin's so-called threat of a nuclear outbreak. Now, common sense says that a country the size of Russia with commitments, etc., should not be, thinking seriously about a nuclear attack, whether tactical or. I mean, there is no dividing line between tactical and strategic. Once you start this business, then you are going full hog. The proximity of Russia to Ukraine, the fact that there are ethnic Russians in the Ukraine, prevailing easterly wind, etc., they all lead one to the conclusion that it was only a threat meant to make people think twice, unless of course Putin becomes completely irrational and starts a nuclear war. There are lessons for India, profound lessons. I hope we took some lessons from the uh, earlier Azerbaijan-Armenia war. There were many there. But here again, we have lessons starting from the top in politico-military leadership in Russia. What kind of planning, what kind of advice was given by the military to the politicians? Did the politician take the advice or not, or did he overrule everybody? Is there an overall commander for this operation, or is each thrust being commanded by a separate general? What kind of planning went on? I mean, was it optimistic planning which hoped for an easy victory and didn't plan for setbacks? Is there jointness? One hears of naval bombardment being undertaken of Odessa port from seawards. Logistics seems to have been very poorly handled. It seems that the Russian soldiers came with 3 to 4 to 5 days of FOL rations, etc., and they're running out of it. Motivation of the soldier seems to be in serious doubt. They are all conscripts from the media, and let's think about it, because we are also talking about this business of tour of duty and training people for 3 years and making them serve in the army. Their power, again, very exaggerated accounts on both sides. How was it used? Was it used properly and usefully or not? 900 to 1,000 missiles have been fired, Caliber, Iskander, etc. We need to closely study what is the impact of such a large use of missiles. Has it put Ukraine out of action? Has it put down? What kind of impact has it had? So these are all areas of interest that we need to study. Finally, what are the implications at the strategic level? India faces a double or a triple jeopardy. Russia, which is the main supplier of our military equipment for all 3 services, has been sanctioned. Their banking procedures are going to be badly hampered. Even if we get equipment, how do we pay for it? And it's not just Russia. Even Ukraine is a major supplier of equipment. The Antonov factory, 110 AN-32s which we fly, is based in Kiev. Most of our gas turbine engines of our naval ships, frigates and destroyers and corvettes are built in the Ukraine. So even if Russia recovers and Ukraine doesn't, they're still in jeopardy. But why? And of course, now America is displeased that we have not condemned Russia as they feel we should have. But we have very little choice there. By cutting off our relationship or harming our relationship with Russia, we will harm ourselves. Our defense capability will be very badly impacted. So the question to introspect on is, how did we come to this situation 75 years after independence? How are we so abjectly dependent on a single country for 75% of our weaponry in all 3 services? What were we doing all these years? What were we thinking about? We claimed non-alignment, then we claimed strategic autonomy. But if you are so dependent and obligated and beholden to one country, where is your strategic autonomy? So we will dwell on all these. But at this point, I'd like to say that the guilty people are our political leadership, who paid no attention to the military-industrial complex, and buying arms was the easy way out. So we did that. The scientific establishment, our defense scientists have a lot to answer for. What were they doing for 75 years? And we built thousands of MiGs and produced jet engines and so on, but we are not capable of delivering it ourselves. And finally, those of us who've been in uniform, we need to look inwards and say, and ask, what did we do when we were in service to ensure that we didn't arrive at such an abject situation? So with these words, Uday, I think I've said all I wanted to at this stage. So back to you.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank Admiral Arun Prakash for setting the stage, as it were. And I think many boxes have been ticked, including what are the long-term implications for India, and where does accountability lie, and what is the way ahead. And I'm sure that this would be addressed as we go down the line. Now, allow me to introduce Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, till recently the Adjutant General of the Indian Army, a colleague from the IDSA, the Institute for Defense Studies and Analyses. He's truly a soldier scholar, has written extensively, and more recently he's been very active in commenting and helping us to understand the war. So I'll request Rakesh, General Sharma, to walk us through the land campaign to the extent that he can. I apologize for giving our learned generals and the other veterans just 8 minutes. But Rakesh, जहां तक हो सके साहब, हिंदी में भी जरा आप अगर हो सके तो अपनी जो भी टिप्पणी है दीजिएगा. All yours, Rakesh. Unmute yourself, Rakesh. Unmute yourself.
So I'd say धन्यवाद instead of thank you. Start with Hindi, and I'm sure you'll give me some compensation for speaking in Hindi. सर जो एडमिरल अरुण प्रकाश ने कहा है उसको मैं रिपीट नहीं करूंगा, और मैं कोई मॉरलिस्टिक लेक्चर नहीं दूंगा कि रशिया सही था कि यूक्रेन सही था. ये मॉरलिस्टिक ये हिस्ट्री आगे बताएगी. मैं मैटर ऑफ फैक्ट एक सोल्जर की तरह इसको विचार रखूंगा, अपने विचार रखूंगा इस विषय में. सबसे पहले कि लड़ाई क्यों हुई, तो मैं जो लास्ट मंथ प्रेसिडेंट पुतिन ने बोला था कि नेटो मेरे लिए एक डायरेक्ट सिक्योरिटी थ्रेट है रशिया की एग्जिस्टेंस के लिए, ये सबसे बड़ी बात है. ये उन्होंने 21 तारीख को फरवरी में बोला था कि नेटो थ्रेट है. और दूसरी बात बोली थी कि यूक्रेनियन हमारे कॉमरेड नहीं है, हमसे बहुत नजदीक है, हमारे भाई बंधु हैं, हम एक ही लोग हैं. तो सबसे पहले मैं पूछना चाहूंगा कि क्या यूक्रेनियंस और रशियंस एक ही लोग हैं? तो उनकी जो भाषा है तकरीबन 65% मिलती जुलती है, उनकी रेस दोनों की ईस्टर्न स्लाविक है, उनकी रिलीजन के बारे में कुछ बोला जा सकता है कि वो ऑर्थोडॉक्स चर्च है, परंतु ऑर्थोडॉक्स चर्च 2018 में यूक्रेनियंस ने जाके जो उनका पैट्रियार्क था कॉन्स्टेंटिनोपल में, उससे बोला हम अलग हो जाएंगे रशियन से, तो वो अलग हो चुके थे. और पिछले 20 सालों में काफी चीजें हुई हैं जिसमें यूक्रेनियंस ने कोशिश की है कि नेटो को ज्वाइन करने की. इसमें दो महत्वपूर्ण मुद्दे हैं. एक है कि पोरोशेंको ने 2018 में अपनी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को अमेंड किया. उसने बोला कि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में लिखा गया कि हम लोग नेटो और यूरोपियन यूनियन को ज्वाइन करेंगे. दूसरी बात यह है कि नेशनल सिक्योरिटी स्ट्रेटजी जो जेलेंस्की ने बनाई थी 2021 में, उसमें उन्होंने क्लियरली लिखा है कि मैं नेटो और मेरा स्ट्रेटेजिक थॉट ये है कि मैं नेटो को ज्वाइन करूंगा. सो ये नेटो को ज्वाइन करने की बातें हवा में नहीं थी, इसको उन्होंने एक पूरा फंक्शनल कर दिया. तो ये एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण बातें हैं. और इस साल जनवरी के महीने में रशिया नेटो काउंसिल मीटिंग में जो यहाँ पे हुई थी, उसमें मीटिंग में नेटो ने क्लियरली बोला था प्रेसिडेंट पुतिन को कि हम लोग ओपन डोर पॉलिसी है, हम नेटो में ज्वाइन करने के लिए यूक्रेन को रोकेंगे नहीं. तो ये एक पूरी बात है. और दूसरी बात थी कि प्रेसिडेंट पुतिन ने बोला था कि डीनाजिफिकेशन और डी डिसआर्मामेंट ये महत्वपूर्ण मुद्दे हैं. एक अल्ट्रा राइटिस्ट लोग बहुत ज्यादा हैं यूक्रेन में, ये भूला नहीं जा सकता है. जो अजोव बटालियन है या आइडर बटालियन है या डनाइप्रो 1 और 2 है या डोनबास बटालियन है, इसको अजोव बटालियन को 2016 में यूएस कांग्रेस ने बोला था, बैन किया था कि इसको ये थग्स हैं, क्रिमिनल्स हैं. इसके बाद ह्यूमन राइट कमीशन ने बोला था, यूएन वाले ने, कि ये अच्छे लोग नहीं है, पर ये लोग एग्जिस्ट करते हैं और ये वास्तव में अल्ट्रा राइटिस्ट वाइट सुप्रीमिस्ट टाइप ऑफ ऑर्गेनाइजेशन इसमें थी. वोटिंग परसेंटेज बहुत ज्यादा नहीं. दूसरी बात मैं कहना चाहूंगा रशियन एप्लीकेशन ऑफ फोर्स के बारे में. हम लोग पहले विचार करते हैं, जब 2 साल पहले चाइनीज हमारे ईस्टर्न लद्दाख में आए थे, तो जब फौज जितनी पहुंची थी उसको हमने सोच के बोला था ये चाइनीज कन्वेंशनल वॉर के लिए नहीं आए हैं, इनकी स्ट्रेंथ इतनी ज्यादा नहीं है. उसी अगर इशू को हम लिया जाए तो ये जितने रशियन फोर्सेस लेकर आए थे और जिस किस्म की लड़ाई होने का अंदेशा था, ये बहुत क्लियर था कि वो लोग शहर कब्जा करने के मामले में नहीं आए हैं. उनके पास इतनी फौज ही नहीं थी रशियन के कि वो कीव को कैप्चर कर सकें. कीव जो है बेंगलोर से बड़ी सिटी है. यूक्रेन जो है वो राजस्थान और यूपी को मिलाया जाए उतनी बड़ी कंट्री है, उसको इस फौज से कैप्चर नहीं किया जा सकता था. तो पहले से ही एम रिस्ट्रिक्टेड लग रहा था और यूक्रेन को भी मालूम था कि इनका एम रिस्ट्रिक्टेड है, ये खार्किव और कीव को कैप्चर करने के वाले लोग नहीं है. दूसरा बात यह है कि क्वांटम ऑफ फोर्स कैप्चर पता होने के बाद में यूक्रेन को मालूम था कि अब हम कैप्चराइज हम अपने को छोड़ नहीं सकते हैं, क्योंकि हमको पता है शहर में तो घुसेंगे नहीं. और जैसे कि लड़ाई शुरू हुई, ये क्लियर हो गया कि फलूजा होने वाला नहीं है, ना ये बगदाद होने वाला है, ना ये त्रिपोली होने वाला है, ना ही राका या ना ही सीरिया होने वाला है. बिकॉज उस किस्म की लड़ाई शुरू ही नहीं हुई तो यूक्रेन को हाथ छोड़ने की जरूरत ही नहीं पड़ी. ये पूरा सिस्टम बदल गया, बिकॉज जितनी की फोर्स लाई गई थी और जिस किस्म से फोर्स का इस्तेमाल किया गया, ये बिल्कुल क्लियर हो गया कि ये एक डिस्क्रिमिनेट वॉरफेयर है. ये रशिया की सीरिया वाली लड़ाई नहीं है। सो जो शॉक था ना, वो शॉक सिर्फ क्वांटम ऑफ फोर्स जितना यूज कर रहे थे, वो शॉक खत्म हो गया उसी चक्कर में। तीसरी बात मैं कहना चाहूंगा, यूक्रेन ने क्या किया अपनी फोर्स का, पिछले 20 सालों से उन्होंने सिर्फ इरेगुलर फोर्स वॉरफेयर के लिए सीखा है, प्रैक्टिस ही एक चीज की है। क्योंकि यूक्रेन एक अर्बन कंट्री है, उन्होंने तैयारी ही सिर्फ अर्बन वॉरफेयर के लिए की थी, और उन्होंने बोला था अब हम डोंबास से आगे नहीं निकलने देंगे रशियन फोर्सेस को, और मैरियोपोल जहां पे अजोव बटालियन को लगाया गया वो नहीं छोड़ेंगे। और रशिया ने बोला, रशिया के मन में विचार था कि लैंड ब्रिज बहुत जरूरी है, बिकॉज क्राइमिया का पानी रोक दिया गया था, क्राइमिया में पानी नहीं था, पानी को राशन किया जा रहा था, उनके लिए ये लैंड ब्रिज, हालांकि उन्होंने एक ब्रिज बनाया है कर्श स्ट्रेट के ऊपर, पर वो ब्रिज से पानी नहीं आता था, तो उनको ये डॉनबास से लिंक अप इस क्राइमिया का बहुत आवश्यक था, इसके बगैर तो उनकी लड़ाई का कोई आगे दारोमदार ही नहीं था। सो ये सबसे बड़ी बात थी कि मैरियोपोल हटाना था, और यूक्रेन ने अपनी मैक्सिमम फोर्सेस उस तरफ लगाई ताकि इनको हटाया न जा सके। तो मैं अब, क्योंकि टाइम की कमी है, मैं बोलना चाहूंगा कि अगर मैं इसको ट्रांसलेट करता हूं कि रशिया के पॉलिटिकल एम्स को मिलिट्री एम्स में क्या बनाया गया, तो पहला था यूज डिस्क्रिमिनेट फोर्स और लिमिट कोलैटरल डैमेज। तो इसीलिए मैंने किसी लड़ाई में पिछले सालों में कभी ह्यूमैनिटेरियन कॉरिडोर्स की बात नहीं सुनी है, ना अफगानिस्तान में, ना इराक में 2 बार, ना सीरिया में कोई ह्यूमैनिटेरियन कॉरिडोर। यहाँ पे पहले से ही दिन से ह्यूमैनिटेरियन कॉरिडोर्स की बात हुई, इंटरनेट डाउन नहीं किया गया, साइबर वॉरफेयर इस्तेमाल नहीं किया गया, रेल लाइंस चलती रही, 2 मिलियन लोग रेल्स में ट्रेवल कर रहे थे, बैटल स्पेस को ब्लॉक भी नहीं किया गया। ये एक डिस्क्रिमिनेट वॉरफेयर था, ये नॉर्मल वॉरफेयर नहीं था। तो उस हिसाब से सोचा जाना चाहिए, और ये इनकी मिलिट्री पॉलिसी थी। दूसरा था मैक्सिमम टेरिटरी सिर्फ ईस्ट ऑफ डनाइपर कैप्चर की जाएगी, मेजर शहरों को कैप्चर नहीं किया जाएगा, कोई भी तरह से हम इरेगुलर अर्बन वॉरफेयर में नहीं इन्वॉल्व होंगे और नहीं इन्वॉल्व हुए हैं। मैक्सिमम लिमिटेड यूज ऑफ एयरफोर्स, मैक्सिमम यूज ऑफ पीजीएम्स, और एक लैंड ब्रिज क्रिमिया जो है वो जरूर बनाया जाएगा, वो हमारे लिए बहुत आवश्यक है। 1 महीने की लड़ाई के में हम क्या सीखते हैं, तो एक है कि देयर इज अ डीकन्फ्लिक्शन बिटवीन हैंडहेल्ड सैम्स एंड एंटी टैंक वेपन्स। क्या प्लेटफॉर्म्स जो हैं फ्यूचर में रिडंडेंट होते जा रहे हैं। अगर हम वापस जाएं नगोर्नो काराबाख में, अजरबैजान में, और ड्रोन्स की लड़ाई का विचार करें, तो एक प्लेटफॉर्म्स में वल्नरेबिलिटी आई है जो पीजीएम्स को ज्यादा स्ट्रेंथ देती है, और इस लड़ाई में देखा जाए तो सिमिलरली ये जो डीकन्फ्लिक्शन रहा है बिटवीन हैंडहेल्ड वेपन्स एंड प्लेटफॉर्म्स, ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट बात है। दूसरी बात मैं कहना चाहूंगा कि रशिया का परसेप्शन मैनेजमेंट टोटल फेल्ड है। इन्होंने प्लान ही नहीं किया था कि हमें रशियन लैंग्वेज से निकल के इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज में कैसे संसार का परसेप्शन बनाएंगे, वो दैट इज अ ग्रेव फेलियर। सो और यूक्रेन की जो फौज है, यूक्रेन की गवर्नमेंट ने बहुत स्ट्रेंथ दिखाई है, उनकी जो नाजी बटालियंस हैं, एक्स्ट्रा राइटिस बटालियंस हैं, उनके ने बहुत ज्यादा स्ट्रेंथ दिखाई, और रशियन का इस मामले में लिमिटेड रिस्पॉन्स रहा। और मैं ये कहना चाहूंगा कि जो सैंक्शंस थी, इतना शायद रशिया को मालूम नहीं था कि वो इतनी 5400 सैंक्शन लगाई गई, टोटल ईरान के ऊपर 3300 सैंक्शन हैं। इतनी सैंक्शन किसी कंट्री में आज तक नहीं लगाई गई, और सडनली 1 हफ्ते में लगा दी गई, unveiled suddenly. It wasn't planned like this. So there is a transformation in what the economic warfare happened beyond the weaponization of economics happened as part of this thing. So I would end here in my 8 minutes before I get ticked off by my erstwhile boss that the brain dead NATO, as what Macron said, has got life here. It has got, the brain is no more dead, and so has the European Union, and it has woken up a sleeping giant called Germany. The US president, who was losing all importance in his own country, has suddenly got an aim in life for presidency. He has got something to move now. He can move also. His movement is a little difficult. China is having a last laugh, net gainer in the whole thing, in this whole thing. And I think I agree with Admiral Arun Prakash. As always, I agree with him. We have to rethink even warfare in context of India. These cities on the borders are not being vacated. The demography will stay. We have to fight wars on territory based on demography and population staying on there. That's what humanitarian law will teach us many things. So that's where I end here, sir. And I've got another 10 minutes of script which I can take on later.
Thank you so much, राकेश। और मैं जितने भी लोग यहाँ पे शामिल हैं, मैं ये भी जरा इनको बताना चाहता हूँ कि राकेश शर्मा साहब जो हैं ये बिल्कुल दिग्गज है जहां भाषा की बात है। ये केवल हिंदी में ही नहीं, अंग्रेजी तथा नेपाली और रूस भी बोल लेते हैं। कभी और इनको बुलाएंगे हम। बट राकेश, many thanks, grateful to you. Let me see if Group Captain Srivastava is with us. TP, if you're here, please switch on your mic and your camera. And in the event you want to circle back, I will request, has TP come on board? Not yet. शायद श्रीवास्तव साहब नहीं है. I'll request Major General PK Mullick. PK, if you're ready, can you please make your remarks and then I'll bring back Group Captain Srivastava in a few minutes. All yours, PK Mullick, General Saab.
Malik sir, we can see your screen. The first slide is up.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Sir, I am available.
TP Srivastava, you'll come after Malik, so please stay on board.
Okay, sir, I am available now.
General Malik, please make your remarks. Group Captain will follow you. TP,
Right,
hang
sir.
on.
Before we start, I have recently written 2 papers. Since this time is very short, we may like to have a look at these 2 papers in case you are interested. I will straight away come to the geography part. Now, the importance of Ukraine to Russia is very much evident in the geography. The northern European plain has a gap between the Carpathian Mountains and the Baltic Sea. The narrow point is referred to as the push funnel. Once an attacker has passed through this narrow choke point, there is an open march to Russia's heartland. In no way Russia can allow a NATO country to be his neighbor. Well, he has got a straight run to the Russia's heartland. Second point is, you can see those graphics. Next point I want to highlight is the Russia's access to warm water port. Despite 23,000 miles of coastline, Russia has no significant warm water ice-free ports with direct access to the ocean. Russia is fundamentally limited in its maritime power because it has no easy way to access the world oceans around the earth. This is a major challenge for Russia. Somehow, I find this vulnerability of Russia is not being played out in the current discourse. One of the major reasons for Russia's 2014 invasion of Crimea was, in reality, it is a strategic imperative to keep the warm water port of Sevastopol. Putin needed to invade Crimea to prevent a crippling blow to Russia's oceanic access. Now, General Rakesh Sharma has mentioned about those military parts. There are a couple of points which has come out loud and clear in this emergence of open source intelligence, OSINT. Now, we all know 80 to 90% of the intelligence comes from OSINT, but here what has happened is, before the invasion began, they had mapped each and every vehicle, each and every unit has been identified. Sid Jones of CSIS has given graphically what are the force level, in what axis they'll go, what are the phases of operation it will do. Russians, as always, the no plan survives the first bullet is fired, but the fact remains that Russia went exactly by that. And second thing which is happening is, people all over the world has combined together and they are analyzing whatever has been put into the web or open domain and quickly finding out whether it is false or whether it is correct, and then giving their verdicts. This is a very interesting development that has taken place. Second is intelligence. Of course, if the Ukrainians are doing well, the American might of the intelligence is behind them. There is no doubt about it. But another very important part is, for the first time, to obviate Russia's false flag operations and other things. USA has divulged the intelligence. They had exactly predicted when Russia is going to invade, the dates. And no intelligence officer will ever like to lose this particular capability that they have. But the US has done it for information warfare to obviate the advantage that that the Russians would have. It had its deficiencies also, but they have done it, and they have done it with success. Now there are a couple of riddles. You know, everybody says Ukraine would be bulldozed over. The Russians are very good at it. I would like to put certain facts. What is the strength of this Ukraine army? It is 209,000. There are 27 combat brigades. After the 2014, they have increased their defense budget. They have gone into very good training process. They are being trained by nothing less than American experts on this insurgency operations. Americans are very bad at counter-insurgency operations, but giving food or आग लगाने वाला जो चीज है जो इंसर्जेंसी में करना चाहिए, they are very good and they are giving the latest state of the art handheld missiles, handheld manpads, and their weapons are as good or as bad as the Russians which are putting in, because Russians have not, for a change, have not put their best possible latest equipments on board. Where is the armored tanks they have been talking about? Where is the most sophisticated air defense systems and all? This is the comparison. I'll skip it. Now, Russia is the best as far as electronic warfare is concerned. Americans forgot it and they went to cyber. But here it is. They have captured their command and control vehicle and they're in the process of sending it to USA, and it will be something like Enigma. Cyber war, General Sharma has mentioned, the ISIS, IIAS and others, everybody knows the cyber capabilities of Russia. They have played very well with the Americans. In the last time, they had disabled the power supply of Ukraine. But there's nothing of that sort is happening here. This is a riddle, I do not know. But why the hell is it not happening? Everybody accepted this will happen. They are the acknowledged masters. Second point is, everybody talks about Russia's offensive capabilities. Does Russia's defensive capabilities match their offensive capabilities? We do not know. But there is a riddle. Then in other things, but I leave it at that. Say one more point, say the nuclear issue. Ukraine had nuclear weapons. As Admiral Arun Prakash has mentioned, today's world, nobody is bothered about the pledge they give. So they were given this thing that kuch nahi hone wala hai, we'll look after you. That has not happened. What happened to Libya? They have also given up. But you see, North Korea is such a stupid country, but nobody can touch that. So this nuclear issue has to be seen in a new light. So then in that, I'll come to the information warfare part. Again, General Rakesh Sharma has mentioned a lot of things. This Russian invasion of Ukraine is being talked as the first TikTok war, like the Gaza war was being talked about, the first artificial intelligence war. Again, as General Rakesh Sharma has mentioned, I'll not repeat that, but Russia's social media platforms are there. They don't have to depend totally on the Western social media platforms, and they have that Vico own Take VK. Their rivals of Facebook at a rate of 50.10 million visitors per month. Then other things like Autonomy, something like that over Twitter. But they were also using the Western media platforms vis-a-vis. If you see China disbanded all these before that. So there is I think there is a lesson which may have to be learned by the Russians. What these people are doing is, Russia has now disbanded in grace of this Facebook and Twitter and all recently.
Okay,
What
can I
they're
request you to wind up, General Sahab?
2 minutes?
1 minute.
Okay, then they're using old and outdated methods. They're telling how to use stores and all. Ukraine is also using this information warfare in a very effective way. Their president was a actor, and some of these videos are you cannot see before that what he used to do, but he's got the bull by the horn, and this is kind of thing which he's doing, and these are all false. These are all false. And what General Sharma again said about this Azov regiment, the neutrality of these media, the social media, has been exposed thoroughly. I'll just quote a beta spokesman. This is Facebook. He says, "For the time being, we are making a narrow exception for praise of the Azov regiment strictly in the context of defending Ukraine." You can see which side they are in. So there is nothing like this. So the current shortcomings of Russians' overhyped disinformation apparatus don't mean that Russia won't find a way to win the information war, achieve its military aims, or continue to inflict devastation in the region. They didn't anticipate an army of Ukrainians and international reporters in their paths, ready to tell another story, but it is too early to declare winners and losers in this information war. I finish here, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. And my apologies, PK, for nudging you. Thank you very much. For those of you who may not be aware, Major General Mullick is from the Corps of Signals. Until before he retired, he was on the faculty of the National Defense College. He's written a very comprehensive paper on the Ukraine war and the information dimension. आप में से किसी को अगर इसी के बारे में बारीकी तरीके से कुछ अगर चाहिए होगा तो आप मैसेज भेज देना चैट बॉक्स में, and we will make sure the link is available to those who want to follow up on this. Thanks, PK. Allow me now to welcome and introduce Group Captain TP Srivastava. Group Captain Srivastava is a veteran fighter pilot of the Indian Air Force, and post-retirement, he has been a very, very active commentator, author of 3 books on national security, and on social media and on other platforms, he has been a regular commentator and critic of very significant policy-related national security matters. I'll request Group Captain Srivastava. TP साहब, आप अपना जरा जो भी remarks हैं बताइए सर. All yours.
Sir, time is 16:43. I stop at 16:51. संस्कृत में एक बहुत उम्दा फ्रेज है, विनाश काले विपरीत बुद्धि. ये फ्रेज यूक्रेनियन प्रेसिडेंट श्री जेलेंस्की के ऊपर पूर्णतया लागू है. ये वॉर, यूक्रेन की जो लड़ाई चल रही है और कब तक चलेगी इसके बारे में भी कुछ नहीं कहा जा सकता जब तक श्री जेलेंस्की इसके बारे में ठीक से नहीं सोचेंगे. जर्मन रीयूनिफिकेशन के समय अमेरिका ने जो एश्योरेंस दिए थे रशिया को, वो तो बहुत पुरानी बात हो गई. लेकिन फरवरी 2021 में श्री जेलेंस्की ने एक कैटेगोरिक स्टेटमेंट दिया था दैट यूक्रेन नाटो को ज्वाइन करेगा. अप्रैल 2021 में रशिया ने एक काफी बड़ी ग्राउंड ऑफेंसिव ग्राउंड ऑफेंसिव एक्सरसाइज लॉन्च करी थी जो जुलाई तक चली. इस एक्सरसाइज के दौरान एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट चीज हुई जिसके बारे में बहुत कम लोगों को पता है, और वो था एक लॉजिस्टिक एक्सरसाइज रशिया ने की जिसमें उन्होंने ह्यूज क्वांटिटीज ऑफ आर्म्स एंड एम्युनिशंस वेयर मूव्ड right opposite Ukraine border, especially eastern and northern border. The world and Ukraine slept over it. Coming nearer times, between 6th February and 16th February, there were 4 categoric suggestions, appeal, request from Russian side. The senior most being from their foreign minister Lavrov on 16th February, when he said categorically that Shri Zelensky must listen to and understand Russian compulsions. Well, this is my understanding of why this war is going on and why Russia attacked. Now, coming back without prevaricating from the main issue, I am covering the air offensive. Now, this air offensive, a lot of people have written and talk about that, oh, it is something totally different. No, there is nothing different. Russia is following its military aim. As I speak to you, Russia has struck 67 Ukrainian towns as I speak to you. Mariupol, Kharkiv, etc. being the major ones. Unfortunately, I cannot show you a clip from Mariupol, which I received from a friend of mine from Astana in Kazakhstan. This boy stayed in Mariupol 3 years back. So he sent me a clip of the street where he stayed, when he stayed, and clip of the same street which it is today. Everything is destroyed. Russian Air Force as well as SSM's attacks are extremely effective. They are reducing Ukraine into a rubble, and it will create a permanent buffer between NATO and Russia, and it will be a good example to the other nations who would like to try this misadventure of moving NATO eastwards. Attacks on Polish borders have also commenced. Now, this is just a message to the Western world that Russia can and will reach. Now, coming to the, I will not cover the losses, etc., as has already been brought out, because the claims vary from 100 aircraft lost to only 11 accepted by Russia. I have gone by only those losses where tail numbers could be seen or the tail could be seen and identified. I counted only 11. Of course, indeed, there must be many helicopter losses, but those figures I will not quote because I cannot substantiate it one way or the other. Few significant events that have taken place. A S-400 kill at a range of 157 kilometers of a Su-27 shot down over Kiev, and this S-400 was launched from that distance. Now, this is of extreme significance. The only thing that I have not been able to find out as to what altitude was this Su-27 flying and what exactly it was doing. But 150 or 157 kilometer is a phenomenal range, and for a SAM, it is a great accomplishment. Now, coming to the losses on the ground. Sir, can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you, TP. Go ahead.
Hello, sir.
We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Hello.
TP, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Hello, sir.
Yeah. I think we have lost
Hello,
his video.
sir. I am on a webinar. I'll call you back. Hello.
TP, please go ahead. You are being heard here clearly on your audio. Ashwini, we seem to have no, he's come back. TP, if you can hear us, will you conclude your remarks?
Hello, sir. I am back. Can you hear me?
He can hear you. You can conclude your remarks. Go
Hello,
ahead.
sir. Hello. Sir,
TP,
can
we
you hear me?
you. Yes, please go ahead.
Hello.
I think you can mute him. Ashwini,
Uday, sir, can you hear me?
I can hear you, TP. Please go ahead.
I can't hear you.
Usko mute kar do, Ashwini. Please mute Group Captain Srivastava. We'll try and get him back. But I think we have a sense of what he was trying to say. I'll try and bring him back later once the audio connection is made. But at this stage, I just want to note that we have received 2 questions from our Facebook and YouTube watchers. एक Mr. Vikas Singh का सवाल आया है regarding the Nagorno-Karabakh war. Mr. Singh, we'll come back to you when the panelists have made their remarks and we'll get a response. And there's one more on giving citizens anti-tank missiles. That also will come back. But at this stage, while we get Group Captain back, I'll request our next speaker Colonel Ravi Rajan, he is a gunner and artillery officer of the Indian Army, had a very illustrious career both in the Army and subsequently in the corporate world. And I'll request Colonel Rajan now to walk us through one perspective of the Ukraine war that he's been studying closely. Ravi, all yours, 8 minutes, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me?
We can
Hello.
hear you, sir. We can hear you.
Right. Right, gentlemen, most of the important aspects, the strategic, the geopolitical, etc., and the run-up to the operations has already been cleared. I will get down to a little bit more on the tactical aspects of things, though it is through the fog of war, etc., and most of the information coming through is, very varied and could be exaggerated depending on which side the media is functioning from. So let's take it from the Western nations. What is coming out from them is that Ukraine is doing very well. They have not been overtaken, overrun, which was expected by now, and that the Americans are also saying that there are a lot of casualties which have been taken on by the Russian troops, and that the attrition rate is quite high. Now, it seems to be a little exaggerated because, I mean, if you're looking at the capabilities of the Ukrainian troops and the army vis-a-vis that of Russia, I think it will be a little lopsided to think that Russia is just sitting down there and waiting to be, sort of blocked, and they had undertaken this operation without due consideration and with their political and military aims in conjunction with each other, and taken the military, on their side to see whether what is feasible, what is not feasible, and what can be done and what cannot be done, as far as the special military operations are concerned, which is what the Russian operations are being called. It's not an invasion. It is none of the other ops of war that we want to talk about. It is a very specific one concerning this particular invasion, as what is being termed by the Western countries. Now, and it is not following the very conventional route which normally these kind of operations would have taken, or what we would believe would have happened. The Ukrainians have said, or the Western media has said, that after 4 or 5 days, their supplies ran out, the Russian supplies ran out, there were desertions, there was looting, and there was a disarray among the ranks of the Russians. Now, I find that a little, not very easy to sort of digest, even if they were conscripts, because at the end of the day, there would be regular troops around to ensure that the conscripts do not take off at a tangent. The other aspect which is being brought out is that they ran short of supply trucks, and that the resupply was very sort of haphazard. Now, we have seen videos and photographs of long lines of convoy of trucks, almost 30 to 40 kilometers long, just standing bumper to bumper. Now, obviously, there is no shortage of trucks or of manpower or of resupply taking place. In fact, what it proves is that there was no problem that the Russian expected from the Ukrainian Air Force or from their artillery or long-range bombardment, because this kind of a convoy sitting there would be like a sitting duck for any other op of war in any other country. So we have to take what the Ukrainians are saying with a pinch of salt. What they're also saying is there were about 5 major generals which have been killed during these operations. Now, that is a huge number of major generals or generals which have been casualties of war. The last time something like this happened was, I think, in the Second World War, when the German army lost 5 to 6 generals, one after the other. So I do not know how they hit these 5 generals. What was the the methodology used to hit these 5 generals? However, I don't think that would be detrimental to the morale of the Russian forces, because they seem to be have laid siege on at least 23 urban centers, what are called urban centers, and they have blocked out all kinds of resupply taking place within those urban centers. So it is the Ukrainians are saying that the advance has been stopped. Maybe the Russians were not planning on advancing all over the countryside. Maybe they were going to do a raising of important buildings, important armament sites, etc., and launch sites. And instead of going in to limit collateral damage, so to speak. After all, this is the country which they would want to be having on their side in due course of time. What has come about is that they have taken over, captured the biolab, which was being run by the US, which the US themselves have agreed upon. So that is a very significant sort of a takeover. And also the SCBMs, the long range of the Russians. Hello. Hello.
We can hear you, sir. We can hear you.
Ravi, go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay. No, I thought there was a. So yeah. So on the western borders of Ukraine, there are the NATO sites which have been taken out by the Russian missiles. So they are well within control of whatever is happening in Ukraine. And as has been mentioned by my learned earlier, they have also hit at the site at Poland to give a signal and to signify as to what they're capable of doing. Now, as far as the Russians are concerned, they may be wanting not to get into the heart of the cities.
Okay, I think again we have a little audio Wi-Fi problem. I think I'll request Ravi to stay on hold for a minute. Ravi, are you back? I think there is a Wi-Fi. It's not.
I've been speaking.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I've been speaking for the last 2-3 minutes.
Yeah, go ahead. Finish your points now, Ravi. You're on the last lap. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So you broke my chain of thought there. But anyway, so the point of the matter is that the Ukrainians are saying that there is attrition of about 500 tanks has taken place. Now that seems to be a hugely exaggerated number, and that they have brought down 186 Russian aircraft. So I don't know if that is a figment of their imagination or they're just propping themselves up. Their morale is being propped up. Now, I was just one point I was talking about taking over these urban centers. Russia will not try to do it because they have an example of Stalingrad with them, and it's a very long memory. Kiev is about 5 to 6 times larger than Stalingrad, and Stalingrad absorbed a whole German army. So there is no way that the Russians are going to go into any of these urban centers to take them out. So as of now, they seem to be balanced on the outskirts of wherever they want to be, and they are poised to see as to which way the Ukrainians are going to go. There will be, sharpshooting. There will be ambushes. There will be insurgent movements, etc., by the Ukrainians. But I think those are going to be just pea shooting as far as the Russians are concerned. Okay. Of course, the real facts will come out in due course of time. The Russians are not very, open about whatever they're doing, what they're not doing, which they shouldn't be in any case. But the people concerned who have got access to the satellites will be very clear about what's happening, what's not happening, and why it's happening and what's not happening.
Thanks, Ravi. I think I'll request you to stop there. Thank you so much. I'll now try and bring back Group Captain Srivastava. He's back with us. And TP, if your audio is, if the Wi-Fi is uneven, I suggest you close your camera and just come back and close your remarks. You have 3 minutes. TP Srivastava, all yours. Can you hear me, TP? I think it's not evident that he can hear. Okay, Ashwini just sent him a direct message to say that we are unable to hear him and he can't hear us, and we'll try and bring him back later.
Okay, sir.
Now let me request Colonel Ashwini, if he can hear me. Ashwini, you're there? You can make your remarks and I'll be in a direct message with TP. Ashwini, please go ahead.
I just want to speak for a couple of minutes, sir, not need the full 8 minutes. And I would just like to start by quoting from an article in UK's New Statesman newspaper that caught my eye. And that said that morality and legality are one reason for opposing war. The other is simply that over the last century at least, it has a poor track record for delivering results. Other than wars of national liberation, one is hard pressed to name a single war of aggression since 1914 that has yielded clearly positive results for the first mover. How prescient this would be is becoming clearer on this first month of the conflict. At the end of it, will there be distinct colors of black and white, or would it be in terms of shades of grey, not only for Russia and Ukraine, but also for a larger group of nations? Would it be, as someone called it, a hurting stalemate? Having said this from 40,000 feet, I just want to come down on some issues and then talk about the fact that it has been reported widely, it has been spoken about the impact on the Indian defense, the Indian armed forces, which are heavily dependent on USSR origin military hardware on these issue of spares and critical component. I think that this is not just an issue for the duration of the conflict, but can be assumed that once this conflict comes to an end, the supply wouldn't immediately resume, since both Ukraine and Russia will first address their own replenishment of attrition losses. We need to be mindful of that. Also, the Western world defense companies, which have their order books being filled up, and this is because ever since the Afghanistan withdrawal, the EU and other countries who have their equipment supply based on Western origins would be queuing up to address their issues. And the leeway that existed with these companies in New Delhi trying to win orders from our domestic acquisition processes will be just that wee little less, as also their enthusiasm to seek technology transfer that India seeks, always wants. I want to also mention that we read Admiral Arun Prakash's article on Monday, which he wrote on the Indian Express on India's self-reliance or Atmanirbhar Bharat. And but the point he specifically made was that let's not talk about the weapon systems, weapon platforms. He gives the example that you have a Tejas fighter or you have an Arjun tank, the platform, but as such, the subsystems that go into it, the engines, the radars, and the such are still being imported and being assembled. He's made the point that we need to shortlist such technologies so that we can domestically design and manufacture these subsystems. I just want to say that I worked in a US MNC Honeywell for about a decade, and amongst the many things that struck me was the relative ability, or rather the inability, of the domestic ecosystem to absorb such technologies. Perhaps this was because of the PSUs with whom we had partnerships with. To give you an example, HAL manufactures under license from Honeywell the TPE 331 engine that goes into the Dornier aircraft at its Kanpur factory since the 80s. And it's even today remains as an assembly facility, as most of these parts to make the engine are being imported. We need to create the localized supply chain for defense manufacturing in the country to reduce our import dependence so far. Fortunately, the Indian private sector and startups are stepping in to close this gap of the complete gamut of designing, manufacturing, along with localized supply chain. But most of it is still their own initiative. The MOD needs to dispel their bureaucratic pace of work where files takes days to move from one desk to another. Moving away from this and again climbing up the stairs to the top floor, sort of gazing down on realism and especially on the IW part of the Western narrative that is being mostly put across. I once again quote from the New Statesman, their author called Adam Tooze, and he said, realism taken seriously entails a never ending cognitive and emotional challenge. It involves a minute by minute struggle to understand a complex, constantly evolving world in which we are ourselves immersed, a world that we can, to a degree, influence and change, but which constantly challenges our categories and the definitions of our interest. And in that struggle for realism, the never ending task of sensibly defining interest and pursuing them as best as we can, wherever, even so, if it means resorting to war. Uh, it should not be normalized as a logical and obvious reaction to given circumstances, but it should be recognized as a radical and perilous act with its moral consequences. And here, sir, to conclude, I just want to insert a passing comment on China, since it was mentioned that what we can say is that it can be reasonably assumed that they have learned priceless lessons from this invasion, which are that however imbalanced the West can be, it still can get its act together. That American military intelligence, as Brigadier General Mullick, brought out, is currently better than anyone else imagined. That even a thrown together civil defense force can embarrass an invading army. And China must be thanking its lucky stars that it did not elect to learn these lessons in Taiwan at its own expense. Uh, Thank you, sir. Just these couple of thoughts that I had, I thought I would share with the audience.
Thank you, Ashwini. Now that you mentioned China and Taiwan in your closing remarks, I just wanted to tell everyone, it was interesting that we got some responses on Facebook from some Chinese, shall we say, individuals or addresses that one cannot quite read or decipher, but I'm sure this point perhaps would be hoisted. On that note, I'd like to now introduce and welcome Admiral Raja Menon. Now, most of you who are following India's strategic and security discourse would be aware of his profile. He's a veteran submariner of the Indian Navy and has authored some very, very valuable books, both on India's nuclear options and nuclear strategy, as also on the maritime strategy. And he's also written and commented on the war in Ukraine in the media in recent weeks. And if you look at him, you can see a man who knows too much. So he's going to compress that into 8 minutes. So Raja sir, all yours. Ashwini, unmuted. Please unmute Raja Menon. Just 1 second, I will try and get him unmuted. Mitra or Ashwini, if you have the option, please unmute the Admiral. By the way, we're getting some good response on Facebook and YouTube for those of you who are.
Am I unmuted now?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Okay. I'm not sure I'll need all the 8 minutes because a large number of points have been covered so far. I would like to concentrate on a few issues. One of the issues is trying to forecast how this war might end. And the reason why I am trying to do that is because if the war ends well for Russia, there is going to be great celebrations in Beijing. Because I think Beijing has thrown in the towel here. I mean, has I think opted to join Russia in the hope that if the Russians win, there might be a China-Russia axis, which will then suppress the hegemony of the United States, and thereby they might get quicker to a new world order. But is that likely to happen or not? I know some of the speakers earlier said that the Russians never had an objective of conquering Ukraine. I'm not so sure about that because they attacked Ukraine on 3 axes. I'm not an expert on land warfare, but as far as I know, the quickest way to arrive at a decision in land warfare is through large maneuvering tank columns. And I think the war has not gone so far according to the way the Russians thought it would. And as far as the performance of the conscripts are concerned, I spent 3 years in Russia, and I can tell you that the conscripts are very discouraging. They work for very few pittance, few rubles a month, and it's considered national service. And if the Russians were thinking of conquering another country using conscripts, then I think they've made a fatal mistake. If the war does not end in a victory for Russia, then and the Ukrainians are able to hold on, as I would like to predict, that that the Russians have, this Russian army, unlike the old Soviet army, has no stomach for urban warfare. And they don't intend to take over this urbanized country. Then in which case they are not going to achieve their objectives. In which case Russia is going to relatively lose on its objectives. Is that a good thing or a bad thing as far as India is concerned? As far as India is concerned, I think it is a good thing, despite the many words of admiration that many people have spoken about the Russian armed forces, because Russia is going to come out of this war enfeebled. Its GDP, you may like to know, is only 1.86 trillion, which is a whole trillion, more than a trillion less than India's GDP. And its GDP is going to reduce even further. And it will depend, therefore, on just two things. It's going to be desperately short of cash. And it's therefore going to depend on two things. One is oil and the other is armaments. And as far as that is concerned, both are to India's advantage. And we mustn't forget our primary objective, which is to be able to offer a punitive response to China in its continuing acts of aggression once it becomes the world's hegemon. I mean, we mustn't lose sight of this long-term aim, that we must keep China in mind. And so far, it is true that we've got 75% of our arms from Russia. But so far, we have got no armament that is actually decisive. I mean, among the decisive armaments, I would put in things like aircraft carriers. We have got one aircraft carrier, but that is certainly not enough. We have got no nuclear submarine on a permanent basis. So if we want to frighten China into behaving itself on the Himalayan border and in other areas, then I think that we should prefer that the Russians don't win this war. Otherwise, there is going to be a duopoly between Russia and China, which will see the Americans off as far as the governance of the world is concerned. On that note, I think I'll finish.
Thank you, Raja sir. I hope that we'll be able to discuss this in the QA and in the closing sort of remarks that I will invite. I will now take a minute or two before I invite Colonel Sodhi to make his remarks. We lost Group Captain Srivastava because of slightly poor Wi-Fi, but he has sent his closing remarks, 2-3 lines, which he's requested me to read out to you. So I'll just take 2-3 minutes. सबसे पहले इन्होंने ये एक खास बिंदु को रेखांकित किया है कि जिस ड्रोन का प्रयोग हुआ है बरेक्टार, this drone and the way in which it was utilized in this war will affect India, since Turkey has provided this platform, unmanned platform, to Pakistan. Secondly, Group Captain Srivastava says, हाइपरसोनिक मिसाइल जो है ये एक नया और आधुनिक हथियार है with huge destructive potential. तीसरा बिंदु, utility of man portable SAMs cannot be overemphasized. India needs to rethink this aspect. आखिरी जो उन्होंने बताया है, till such time as India remains dependent on imported weapons, ये बात एडमिरल अरुण प्रकाश ने भी अपने ओपनिंग रिमार्क्स में कहा था, बाकी पैनलिस्ट ने भी कहा, India remains vulnerable at least till 2040. That is another 18 years. Because और उन्होंने इसको रेखांकित किया है, भारत जो है R&D रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट के अंदर इन्वेस्टमेंट हम बहुत कम करते हैं. उदाहरण के लिए उन्होंने ये बताया है कि इंडिया एंड चाइना had identical R&D budgets in 1973. बांग्लादेश के युद्ध के 2 साल के बाद 1973. Chinese R&D budget today in 2021 figures जो उन्होंने दिया है is more than 30 times that of India. In fact, it may even be greater than that of USA. और अंत में टीपी श्रीवास्तव साहब कहते हैं कि आत्मनिर्भर भारत जो बार बार कहा जाता है, this could remain a mere slogan. That is the last point. TP, thank you. I hope I have captured what you have conveyed. On that note, now I will request our next speaker, Colonel Sodhi, JS Sodhi, sapper officer, and if anyone has been following the Ukraine war in the last few weeks, literally 4 weeks, Colonel Sodhi has been very prolific, both in print, in the media and television and on web platforms. I have followed him very closely. I'm very proud also to introduce him as a fellow Foxy. Now, this is a little bit of tribalism from the NDA, but I am from the NDA's Foxtrot Squadron. And, you know, Jassi Sodhi is one of our younger, brighter stars who is now contributing to the Indian discourse on security. Colonel Sodhi, all yours.
Thank you, sir. It is an honor and privilege for me to be on the panel with such co-panelists who, apart from being iconic officers while in service, have been legendary figures both in the print and the electronic media. I've been following all of them over the past many years, and I would like to admit that each one of their writings and their discussions on TV has greatly impacted me. Today, I'll be speaking on the nuclear aspects of this war. On 24th February last month, when the Russian forces invaded Ukraine, around the same time, President Putin in a televised address to the whole world said, if any country comes to the aid of Ukraine, they will be met with consequences they would have never seen in their history. Well, it was not a mere rhetoric by President Putin. He meant it. He meant it because he had worked towards it for last many years. With 6,255 nuclear weapons in the Russian kitty, which is the highest number of nuclear weapons in the entire world, this was no mere threat. Out of this 6,255 nuclear weapons, 1,911 are tactical weapons and the rest are strategic weapons. Now, 2 days after the war, on 26 February last month, President Putin put all his nuclear forces on alert. And a day later, on 27 February, their nuclear submarines sailed down from the Barents Sea into the Arctic Ocean. Well, this all measures clearly proved that President Putin was meaning each word when he threatened the world of dire consequences in case anyone tried to help Ukraine. And till date, no ally, no alliance the world over has sent its military boots on the soil of Ukraine. Initially, President Putin thought that this war would be over soon because 30% of the Ukrainian population is pro-Russian. They speak the Russian language. So his initial estimate was the war would be over pretty soon. But this has not happened. Today, almost a month has gone by, and still the Russians are there in Ukraine trying to get control of Kyiv or trying to get control of President Zelensky. Zelensky one day says he doesn't want to join NATO. The next day he says he'll fight to the last man, the last bullet. This is because Zelensky has enough support from America and from NATO. It suits American interests also that the longer this war between Russia and Ukraine goes on, Russia bleeds economically. Russia when the war started last month, had a forex of $630 billion. Each day of its war in Ukraine is costing Russia $20 billion. Any nation or any person in life has always limited money, be it the richest man in the world or the richest country in the world. Russia is now facing the pressure because the economic sanctions are working, their own financial kitty is depleting. Now, all this points towards one particular thing, that Russia also wants this war to end soon. And Zelensky is in no mood to end the war because he has enough support from America. Now, in case the war doesn't end soon and Russia is bleeding financially, Russia will have no option but to go in for a very impactful event, which can be either a chemical war or a nuclear war. If we go back in history, during the World War II, when the Americans realized that the war was going on pretty long and the Japanese were in no mood to give up, they dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the 6th and the 9th August 1945, respectively. As a result, 6 days later, on 15th August 1945, Japan surrendered its arms, and on 2nd September 1945, the World War II came to an end. We are slowly inching towards that particular situation because neither America, nor Ukraine, nor Russia are in mood to go back even an inch. And this spells trouble, not only for Ukraine, but for the world over. We have seen enough death and destruction happen in Ukraine. The reason may be any, but the fact is death and destruction has taken place. And if such a catastrophe happens, we all well know how powerful and how ghastly it would be. In the atom bomb attack of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 135,000 people died in Hiroshima and 64,000 in Nagasaki. The atom bombs used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were of the yield 12 to 14 kiloton. Today, the nuclear weapons are in the range of 450 to 500 kiloton. We can see the amount of catastrophe that can befall Ukraine and the world as such in case the nuclear thing happens. So finally, to conclude, I would say, now that the war has reached a place where none of them are ready to go back, the world order has to now step in, whether it is America, it is NATO, it is any world leader, it is United Nations, whether they have not been successful in the past, but now everyone has to step in, to chip in, to ensure such a situation does not happen in Ukraine, what happened in World War II. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Colonel Sodhi. I think your reference to the nuclear dimension is very important, very well taken. Time permitting, we'll discuss it. Now, allow me to invite our last panelist speaker for this evening's panel discussion, Lieutenant General Kamal Dawar, very illustrious, respected cavalry general of the Indian Army. He was founder of the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, when it was set up in the integrated IDS headquarters, and a prolific writer post-retirement. He's up there in the hills in Kasauli, and we've all benefited. Dawar sir, आप प्लीज अपने 8 मिनट में जो आप कहना चाहते हैं लेसन्स फॉर इंडिया, आप उनको जरा बारीकी तरीके से बता दीजिए साहब. Kamal sir, all yours. Unmute yourself, Kamal Dawar sir. Unmute कर देना भाई जनरल साहब को.
Can you hear me, please?
Yeah, we can. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Commodore Uday Bhaskar, for inviting me to this eminently useful discussion. A privilege to listen to the considered views of all our eminent panelists. Now, as asked by you, will try to share my thoughts on the lessons emerging from this unfortunate, unexpected, kinetic conflict, which appears will reshape the current well-established international order, or should I say global disorder. Let me call them early lessons from this conflict, which even today, 28 days after mighty Russia's invasion of a much weaker neighbor, Ukraine, this conflict's ultimate trajectory appears today uncertain and more dangerous for the world than even when the Russian invasion commenced. Now, I'm sure most governments, professional militaries, and strategic analysts the world over would be analyzing the various nuances and aspects of this terrible war. the first war in Europe at this scale and destruction after World War II. The first lesson which I feel for all of us is that notwithstanding the existence of nuclear, chemical, and bacteriological weapons, nations may deny the existence or the presence of chemical and bacteriological weapons, but we all know what the reality is. The fact remains that the possibility of war anytime, anywhere is always present. Now, this is my first point. Now, India is situated in one of the most geopolitically stressed regions of the world, namely South Asia, with two not so friendly neighbors who pose a threat to our security and well-being independently and in collusion, and thus the possibility of war is omnipresent. So we have to be always prepared for a two-front war. Combat capabilities, as we all know, take inordinately to accomplish. So there is no time to waste. All the ingredients of comprehensive national power, both military and non-military, have to be looked into. So let's get going. These are and critical times. हमें हमेशा तैयार रहना है. इसके अलावा और कोई तरीका या और कोई वो नहीं है. हमेशा आपको तैयार रहना है security wise. Now, secondly, the next lesson is that notwithstanding you being part of an alliance or grouping in any hot war situation, we are not talking of humanitarian or disaster management situations, on hot war situations. Please remember, and as some others panelists have alluded to, no nation is going to put its boots on the ground for you. Poor Ukraine is a good example. Now, your allies and friends can assist you financially or militarily, but nothing more. Thus, India must factor in that it better be prepared to fight its own battles, even if you're an active member of the Quad or any other Southeast Asian or Asian grouping. Of course, India can fight its own battles and will do it successfully when required. But we have to get out of our old habit of being reactive most of the time. Now, the third lesson which comes to my mind, or the third early lessons, as I've said, is that war comes unexpectedly, and thus India has to ensure that its overall security preparedness, including the holdings within its arsenal, remains at the desired levels. In warlike situations, there could be sanctions also imposed on you, and nothing critical is available off the shelf, even if you have the money. Thus, Atam Nirbharta, that is self-reliance in arms and ammunition, weaponry, equipment platforms, so on and so forth, is an absolute must. The government without fail and notwithstanding any monetary constraints must give a major push to our indigenous defense industry. And we must produce our weapons, our requirements as quickly as possible on our own. Now, this is a critical imperative. I know it's easier said than done. We have failed in the past, but nevertheless, let's put in all our effort to be self-reliant. Now, this is absolutely a critical imperative. Now, the next lesson, as a follow-up of self-reliance I mentioned, is that the Indian armed forces are dependent on Russia for nearly 70% of its weaponry and platforms of all types in the three services. Now, as we work towards Atam Nirbharta, we should also critically look at diversifying our arms purchases from other sources too. I know it's easier said than done, but it is necessary. We cannot have put all the eggs in one basket. Now, the fifth lesson, which is that in our armed forces, we have many similar equipment and platforms which the Russians and the Ukrainians are using, like T-90 tanks, BMP-2 and 3 mechanized infantry combat vehicles, 155mm artillery, Grad, Smerch, rocket batteries, the Su-30, the MiG-29 jets, the S-400 system, armed helicopters, drones, cruise missiles, and a variety of other weaponries. Now, the performance of all these weapons and platforms must be carefully evaluated by our forces, and suitable measures undertaken regarding their application and employment keeping the Indian context, the Indian terrain in mind. And the next lesson I would also like to mention here is the application of military strategy, operational art, and even tactics by the Russians in this conflict. I don't have the time to go into details, but somewhere to me, it appears that they have faltered to some extent. A point hopefully the Indian armed forces will study for our own benefit. Why are the Russians getting inflicted with so many casualties? What are their tactics? You know, driving along highways, they're like sitting ducks. So many prongs. Are these multi-pronged attack in Ukraine? Are they, you know, in concert with each other, or are they independent? What is the terrain like? So all this, somewhere or the other, I get a feeling that the Russians have faltered to some extent, even in basic tactics. So I hope the Indian Armed Forces will be studying all this applications in our context very critically. Now, the next lesson I would like to emphasize is the importance of information warfare, which has been touched upon by the previous speakers. Now, the Russians, as you know, did manage to launch their invasion with a high degree of surprise. But somewhere they have lost the plot in more ways than one. Today, the bulk of the world is convinced about Putin being a megalomaniac, or as US President Joe Biden called him a war criminal or the new Hitler, so on and so forth. Now, the global media, by and large, are showing the death and destruction being caused in Ukraine. Thus, all those who are affecting sanctions on Russia are doing without any second thoughts or any remorse. Even I think the world population feels very strongly that the Russians are totally at fault. Now, this is where the Russians have faltered in their perception management. Now, something we can learn from this example. Now, the next lesson for India I would like to share with you all is the value of strategic autonomy. Now, we are a large nation. We are an emerging global power. And if we wish our progress to be unhindered in the near future, we must work towards being able to influence global events. That will only happen if we are economically sound, militarily well prepared, and importantly, internally very united. Now, the Americans, as you all know, they're no saints. Now, they have a habit of classifying with us or not with us habit, as it is termed as my way or the highway. Now, India since decades has followed the middle path, and somewhere all nations have admired our foreign policy concept of genuine non-alignment. I would humbly recommend we must stick to it. Now, another critical aspect.
Sir, last 2 minutes, Kamal Dawar, sir.
Yeah, I won't cross. Another critical aspect emerging from this conflict, which may shape the global geopolitical narrative, is the extent of the Russia and China relationship, which impacts the world and certainly India, the emerging Russia and China relationship. Thus, we Indians will have to monitor the emerging relationship between these two nations as regards we are concerned. And meanwhile, we have to tread this diplomatic shaky ground very carefully. Finally, I would like to request the government that they must augment military spending where critically required. We spend under 2% of our GDP, which is woefully inadequate. There are governmental areas where economy and overall expenditure can be affected. The government must endeavor to allocate 3% of our GDP to augment our military preparedness. And I'm sanguine that our government would already be thinking of instituting a commission of experts to critically analyze the myriad lessons of this unfortunate conflict. And course corrections, prophylactic measures should then be instituted for the nation's security and welfare. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, General Dawar. And I think all the lessons that you have enumerated are very valuable. We'll have them all tabulated. We have reached, I think, the end of the formal presentations and remarks. Keep all other phones on mute, please, Mitra and Ashwini. We've reached the end of our formal session in terms of panelists and speakers. We have 2 questions. I apologize कि हम बाकी सवाल नहीं ले सकते हैं, समय कम है. I'll request General Rakesh Sharma to answer the first question from Mr. Vikas Singh B, which has come on Facebook. Rakesh साहब, आप इनका जवाब दीजिएगा.
Sir, sir, I can't read it, sir. Can you read it out for me,
This
sir?
is regarding the war.
Yes, sir.
In Nagorno Karabakh.
Yes, sir.
And what are the implications for us in India?
So, जो नगोर्नो कराबाख का है, उसमें हर बंदा एक ही बात बोलता है कि ड्रोन वॉरफेयर. मेरे को दो लेसन ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट लगते हैं नगोर्नो कराबाख के. एक है कि 500 मर्सनरीज को, सीरियन नेशनल आर्मी के मर्सनरीज को टर्की ने लाकर अर्मीनियंस के डेप्थ एरिया में छोड़ दिया. ये 500 जो सीरियन इंसर्जेंट टाइप थे, इन लोगों ने डेप्थ एरिया की अर्मीनिया को पूरा टॉपसी टर्वी कर दिया. तो ये ड्रोन्स इज वन वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग, बट दिस द हाइब्रिड नेचर ऑफ द वॉरफेयर वेयर द डेप्थ एरियाज वर सॉर्टेड आउट is a major problem. And I think we need to learn from this, because we will, any conflict we go into, this nature of warfare or this character of warfare where there will be people who will fight irregular while conventional are being fought, it will be enmeshed together. First round fire, there will be people behind the back. That is one. And दूसरी बात मैं कहना चाहूंगा सर, कि वहां पे भी एक लाइन ऑफ कंट्रोल थी between Nagorno Karabakh, between Armenia and Azerbaijan. वो अर्मीनिया के हिसाब से बड़ी स्ट्रेंथ थी, परंतु क्या हुआ कि वो अजरबैजानी फोर्सेस न्यू कि इसको ब्रेक करने में हमको प्रॉब्लम लगेगी, तो उन्होंने सिर्फ पहले सिर्फ डेप्थ एरियाज को विध्वंस करने की कोशिश की. तो उन्होंने कहा ये फॉरवर्ड वाले जो लीनियर डिफेंसेस हैं, दे विल ब्रेक ऑन देयर ओन, they will fall down on the crumble on their own, and this is exactly what happened. So targeting the depth areas of Armenia was the game changer in that matter. So we rely so much on linear defenses now. I think sir, मैं अपने बारे में बोलना चाहूंगा. ये 63 में एक रेजोल्यूशन हमने पास किया था, not an inch of territory we lost. 63 is not 2022. We need to reconvince ourselves as to how we are going to fight wars. These linear defenses have seen a failure in all wars, from Maginot Line to Israel war, and also in Armenia war, because you just envelop the depth areas and destroy the depth, forward defenses will fall. We need to rethink. That's a major lesson I drew from Nagorno-Karabakh. Drones are okay, it is overhyped issues there.
Thank you very much. विकास सिंह साहब, पता नहीं आप वहां पे हैं कि नहीं, पर ये आपको बहुत ही, मैं कहूंगा कि बारीकी तरीके से आपको जवाब मिला है. The other question which I will sort of try and address is this question of providing anti-tank missiles, the Javelin, to the citizens of Ukraine. And we have seen visuals where even the women of Ukraine have been given personal weapons and to defend their country. I think the question was, what will be the impact of this? I think the long-term impact is likely to be very corrosive, because we are seeing a certain pattern where a non-state entity, because we are coming back to some fundamentals, that the use of force has to be backed by state legitimacy. And this whole post 9/11 debate in security and strategic issues was that we now have a situation where Weber's formulation about the monopoly of force by the state has been stood on its head. This was after 2001, 9/11. Now we are in 2022, 21 years later. And the manner in which the Ukrainian citizen has been empowered, it will not remain confined to Ukraine. It's not as if there'll be a neat ending to this war and that all ordnance will be returned. I think we can expect, given the kind of low intensity conflict in different parts of Eurasia and other parts of the world, and the permeation. So the short point is that all this ordnance and all this know-how is likely to cause a long-term challenge to the legitimacy of the use of force, as also the monopoly that the state enjoys. But I'll stop there. I apologize कि हम बाकी जितने भी सवाल आए हैं chat box में, हम उसको अभी जवाब नहीं दे सकते हैं. We have overshot by about 10 minutes. I think everyone is here. I'm going to request Admiral Prakash whether he'd like to offer any closing remarks, and we will then conclude after that. Arun sir, if you can hear me, you'd like to unmute. And please unmute Admiral Prakash. There he is.
Yeah,
Arun, sir?
okay. Yeah, I think it's been a long and very fruitful session. No closing remarks are necessary, but I'll just point out to today's Times of India. This relates to the point made by Colonel Channan about Atmanirbharta. Today's Times of India's lead editorial says that this business of Russia, our arms supply, weapon supply from Russia being shut off is highly exaggerated. The logic of the editorial, I don't know who writes these pieces, is that Russia needs our money as much as we need their weapons. So there is no need to worry. Full stop. Now that's just the kind of attitude that we've had for the last 75 years, which has brought us to this juncture. So I think we need to get past this and realize the point that has been made by various speakers that you need to be self-sufficient in certain areas of weapon technology to break free from this kind of we find ourselves bound hand and foot today as far as options are concerned. So I think that's one point. And the other point relates to Colonel Sodhi's very alarming prediction that nuclear weapons may be used. Unless Putin becomes totally irrational and desperate, I don't think nuclear weapons are not meant to be used. I mean, full stop. They're meant to stop the use of nuclear weapons by other countries, or perhaps to deter even conventional warfare. But if you have to use them, then you failed in all aspects. And one hopes that there will be people in the Kremlin and people who surround Putin, and if they really feel that he's bordering on irrationality, they'll do something about it. I mean, a coup or a Kremlin plot is not out of question. And in the meantime, let's keep our fingers crossed and send up prayers that Mr. Putin retains his balance and rationality. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Arun sir. So on that note, I think since we've crossed our designated time, I just want to say कि आज जितना भी हमने बातचीत किया है, हमारे जितने भी यहाँ पे एक्सपर्ट्स हैं, उनकी टिप्पणी हमने जो सुना है, एक मैं कहूँगा कि खास बिंदु है या एक अगर मुख्य धारा है आज का जो संवाद है, मैं कहूँगा कि वो आत्मनिर्भरता जो बार बार हमारे मोदी साहब कहते हैं कि उसको हम किस प्रकार से आगे ले जा सकते हैं, वो भारत के लिए सबसे अहम राष्ट्रीय हित है। और इसमें गुरुदेव टैगोर का जो लाइन है, बार बार जो कहा जाता है एकला चलो, भारत को शायद उसको स्वीकार करना पड़ेगा। बट whether or not, I think as Admiral Prakash just pointed out, for 75 years, every government has paid lip service to self-reliance, but the tangible progress has been rather modest. I hope that will be one of the takeaways. On that note, I want to thank everyone who's been part of this discussion. First of all, our panelists, who have done, I think, a great service by being with us for almost 95 to 100 minutes. The numbers are very impressive. I want to thank the two platforms that have done cross streaming. खास हमारे हिंदी के जो web platforms हैं, बहुत धन्यवाद. And for all our young viewers, if any of you want to share your thoughts, South Asia Monitor offers a platform. You can see it. If you want to make comments, have a chat, please let us know, and we'd be happy to do this again. And you all can even write for South Asia Monitor. And I want to thank all our panelists. You know, each of them, I think, has brought very valuable perspective to this particular issue of the Ukraine war. And lastly, I want to acknowledge the technical help by a number of people, many whom you cannot see. Some of our younger researchers who have helped us with the technical part. Most of us on the screen, by the way, have more yesterdays than tomorrows. We can't even get our cell phone SIM changed. So doing a Facebook Live for the first time was quite a challenge, but we pulled it off. So thanks to Ashwini, thanks to Mitra, thanks to Anandita, Shreya, all the others. And as I said, if we are all agreed, we can do this again. But on that note, let me sort of say thank you personally to General Dawar, Admiral Arun Prakash, General Mullick, Admiral Raja Menon, Colonel Sodhi, Col Ravi Rajan, General Rakesh Sharma, and Group Captain Srivastava, who I think his audio has been uneven, Wi-Fi. Thank you, gentlemen. And as I said, I will exit last. So those of us who are on the screen can leave one by one and we'll move on.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.